We are resuming meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, which started on April 13th, 2021. Today's meeting, as you know, is taking place in a hybrid format. We have our clerk present in the committee room and of course supporting staff, but at this point there's no members there. So all of us the rest of us will be participating virtually. So just a reminder, we still always, I myself forget to sometimes unmute yourselves. And when you are about to speak, raise your hand in the toolbar below if you'd like to speak to anything or call out if you have a point of order that you have a point of order so I can distinguish as to whether you want to, speak on the regular speakers list or would like to raise a concern. Yeah, other than that, interpretation, just a reminder, you've got that at the bottom. Let's make sure with the points of order and stuff as well, we wait for the speaker to stop speaking and not interrupt ourselves so that it's easiest for the interpreters. We are still on Mr. Turnbull's amendment from the last meeting. We do have a speakers list. I do have both the motions before me. So if anyone does need, to be refreshed as to what the nuances are between the main motion and the amendment, let me know. We had Miss Shanahan on the floor when we suspended last. So I will give the floor back to her, but I will let you know that we've got, after that, we had Miss Lambropoulos, but she is not here at this time. So she'll probably get dropped off the list unless she's back to resume her spot. Miss Pettypot Taylor is after that. And then we had Mr. Long, who is also not here currently and will get dropped off the list. Just so you have an idea. So Miss Shanahan and then most likely Miss Pettypot Taylor would be after her then.
Point of order, Madam Chair?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I note that we have Madame Shanahan, who is relatively new to PROC, so I welcome her. And I welcome her perspectives. It's always good to get new perspectives on this meeting, but I would encourage you, Madam Chair, to remind all members that the topic we are discussing primarily is on prorogation. I remind you of that, Madam Speaker, because in weeks past, we have seen several members who have a propensity to veer off topic and at times become completely irrelevant to the topic which we are supposed to be addressing. So I would hope, Madam Speaker, that you will remain vigilant in your duties to keep people on topic. And if they do tend to veer off, that you offer a course correction to get them back to the topic of which we are discussing. And that will, I think, end up being a far more productive meeting and stop the interventions coming from people like myself and others, reminding of the rules of relevance and repetition. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lukiski. And I'm sure all the members are heeding your warning, and we appreciate the reminder. I'll do my best to keep everyone on topic. Ms. Shanahan, I'll give the floor back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I do just want to note how pleased I am to be here in this committee and to make a reacquaintance with my good colleague, Mr. Lewinsky, who was an excellent chair of the Committee for Government Operations. I think we did tremendous work together in the last Parliament, and I so respect his words of guidance and of wisdom. And so I hope that what I will be saying today will be germane and will be useful to the topic at hand. Mais c'est vrai que la semaine...
It is true that last week I told my mind because, as you know, we don't often have this opportunity as an MP to participate in other committees, especially committees like PROG, where we are given the opportunity to address the ways and procedures of the House. So it is certainly very interesting for a person like myself to be given this opportunity, the historical aspects, and to get some more perspective on House procedure, because I'm far from being an expert in that field, but I think it enlightens me quite a lot to participate in this committee. That being said, I'd like to note that it is unfortunate for us to be here debating Ms. Vecchio's motion that's before us today, and the amendment by Mr. Turnbull that's trying to correct the amendment, the motion. I was hoping that after the WE scandal, that committees would focus on something else. My friends from the opposition could have avoided playing those tricks. I would remind you that I also sit on the ethics committee, so I've seen quite a lot of things in relation to the WE scandal. This is quite unfortunate because as MPs, we should focus our work on the real issues that matter to Canadians. We are currently in the third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Third wave. A year ago, we were hoping to get through a first wave and going back to normal. But here we are, a year later, in a third wave of the pandemic, because of some provinces' failure to establish, and I say that with all due respect for levels of government, because it is very complex and very difficult. In my riding of Châteauguay-Lacolle, I was fortunate enough to witness a good level of cooperation between levels of government, but I know that it wasn't the same everywhere. Some provinces have failed to establish adequate measures to ensure people's safety and health.
Canadians are rightly preoccupied by much more important questions. They're preoccupied by the millions of doses of vaccines that everyone is talking about today. It's quite something. In Quebec, right now, we're very proud of the organization of the distribution of vaccines, the system for making an appointment, which is very simple, very accessible. As the government announced recently, we're able to vaccinate people at younger and younger ages and younger age groups. That's what we're seeing today. There are also workplaces, big companies that are coming on board with the solidarity that we expect from all players throughout the country in order to truly be able to work together to combat COVID. We indeed want to concentrate on our imminent economic recovery, and it's coming. It will be one of the largest, biggest tests for our generation. Indeed, we talk a lot about this. Those who lived through the Second World War had to rebuild throughout Europe, and there was a major transformation of our economy which occurred after the Second World War. Those people, our parents, our grandparents, truly worked to make the world a better place for us, for young people then, and that's our test today, to make a better world for our children and our grandchildren. And this is what we did in the budget that was tabled last week. It must be a good budget because the Conservatives The opposition, whose job it is to criticize, didn't have much to say about it. I imagine that it's because they didn't find anything to criticize in the budget, despite the fact that they voted against it. And they don't want Canadians to be aware of the content of the budget, but we want to talk about these initiatives, investments in health, in the environment. This is the next test that we'll be facing.
Point of order.
Yes.
Madam Chair, I really don't know how the budget is relevant to the amendment at hand and how it relates to the amendment related to last summer's prorogations. I would encourage Ms. Shanahan to get back on topic.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nader. Ms. Shanahan, maybe I guess if you can explain how you think the invitations at hand in the amendment make your remarks relevant or not relevant, or and if they're not, if you can steer back. Thank you.
Avec plaisir, Madame la Présidente.
With pleasure, Madam Chair, because indeed, prorogation was important in order for us to be able to pivot, which was needed because it was no longer the same world. In 2019, there was no pandemic. We had other issues at the time. We had other projects. But there was no inkling of what was to come. We were elected on another program. But when the pandemic hit and we were caught up in the crisis, and indeed, I'm coming to my point about why prorogation was not only necessary, but truly the only thing to do at the time when the decision was made to prorogue. So we must be clear. This motion, the original motion, is just a game of smokes and mirrors. What can we say about this attempt to try to keep the WE scandal alive? Because that's all I see here. Several other parliamentary committees examined this in detail. There are more than 5,000 pages of documents. There were hours and hours of testimony. And no one was able to find anything demonstrating that there was anything inappropriate here. There was nothing inappropriate whatsoever. That's the real problem here, Madam Chair. The opposition just can't accept the fact that it spent all of this time that it should have devoted to helping in the fight against COVID. It spent all of this time doing other things instead of putting forward positive measures that could have helped the federal government as well as the provinces with regard to organizing the distribution of vaccines. No, they preferred to delve into the WE affair. We saw the expressions of frustration on their faces when they were listening to officials, one after the other, giving testimony and stating that nothing untoward had happened. And this was later confirmed by thousands of pages of documents. We were able to see the frustration on their faces after hearing the Prime Minister. Indeed, the Prime Minister appeared before the Finance Committee, I believe, Madam Chair. His Chief of Staff and ministers appeared before the committee. And they all said the same thing. The Canadian Student Program was a very good program. The Canada Student Grant Program was a wonderful program amongst dozens of programs that we established during the beginning of the crisis. We thought we were doing the right thing, but unfortunately, we failed in its execution. Who has ever succeeded 100% of the time? I don't think that's achievable, at least not in our field of endeavor. We've already seen this type of thing, and this is why we have committees that study issues, that study the operations of the government. That's why we have all of the public accounts work, because it's ongoing work. We always have to look at what we've done and seek to find ways of improving our performance. In this case, there was a failure with the execution of the plan, and the money was given back. I've heard the comments from opposition members on this. Members saw that there were no funds left for student programs this year, but the news was well received. We have more money in these programs for the summer. And in the Lac-Gull region, this news was very well received. Coming back to our issue here, officials and politicians devoted countless hours to ensuring that the programs would be available to help Canadians in these trying times, Canadians experiencing difficulties. And we have mentioned several programs. I'm talking about CERB. I'm talking about wage subsidy programs, rent subsidy programs. These were very well received, especially here in my riding and in other ridings throughout the country. As I stated earlier, mistakes were made, and the Prime Minister was the first to admit this. He apologized to the Canadian public. At the height of the first wave of the pandemic, working at a crazy speed, well, these things were bound to happen. And colleagues opposite tried repeatedly to find a got you moment. That's why we're here. That's why we spend hours in other committees, like my other committee, the other committee I sit on, the Ethics Committee, because the opposition sees there an opportunity for a got you moment. They didn't get it. And apparently they have nothing else to do but to keep looking for one. In the end, at the end of the fall, last fall, after hearing hours and hours of testimony, after seeing pages and pages of documents, thousands of pages of documents, the opposition clearly understood that it had exaggerated in its role, and it rightly moved on to other things, because I imagine that voters in all of their ridings were asking that we deal with the pandemic. That was the only thing that mattered, and it's still the only thing that matters. Despite all of that, here we are yet again, here with yet another motion before this committee, which is so transparent, dealing with the We Charity issue. But it's divided up, and we're talking about the prorogation initiative in 2020. It's a joke. We want to move now with the amendment to something that's more reasonable. There is an attempt here to achieve something that might satisfy everyone. As we've previously heard before this committee, we've heard it stated, our constitutional conventions do give us authority to consult with regard to prorogation, but the decision belongs only to the representative of Her Majesty here. We also learned that the Prime Minister doesn't need a reason to prorogue Parliament. In the history of this country, prorogation was used to jumpstart the order of the day for Parliament, to start again from square one. The delay between dissolution of Parliament and a speech from the throne, well, has varied in time. It could last a few hours to a few weeks, a few months, and this has always been the case in our Parliament. It's a tool that can be used and has been used, especially in situations of crisis. I find that it's rather interesting to note that the opposition is using this lag time between prorogation and the speech from the throne of September to purport that this was tied to the We Charity issue. We were in the midst of a pandemic. That was the focus of our government. That was the focus of Canadians. They wanted to know how we should organize our affairs in order to be in a position to face this pandemic that clearly was going to last for an extended period of time. No one knew at the time if it would be a matter of months, and we're still in the midst of the pandemic, aren't we?
The former Conservative Prime Minister, just to give you a little more history, in 2008 prorogued Parliament for weeks before coming back to the House, or before bringing the House back, rather. So I find it rather ironic that some members here who were part of that government are against prorogation now. Prorogation is a political act in itself, which takes into account political considerations, and there's nothing inappropriate about that. Politics involves all activities that take place in the political sphere. It has to do with how we organize. It's how we organize the business of the day. And when there is a fundamental change, like there was with the health crisis, obviously there had to be a political decision. And obviously prorogation was a political decision because that reset was necessary. We really had to shift our direction. And regardless of what the opposition says, there was nothing inappropriate about the Prime Minister's decision. That was his right to make that decision. Why is prorogation political? And why is it appropriate and acceptable? Well, because government's business is political. And one has to make the distinction between a political act and a partisan act. Here in Châteauguay-Lacolle, sometimes my constituents tell me they don't like politics, but it's not politics that they don't like. They're all involved in all kinds of organizations. They advocate for all kinds of causes, whether it be housing, conservation, wetlands, whether it be their work to tackle poverty. They're very involved, and we have good conversations. And I say to them, that is politics. Everything that you're doing are political acts. It's partisanship that you don't like, and that I do understand. They don't understand the arguments that take place here between elected representatives. And I always say that during an election campaign, obviously, we need to put forth our policies and our platforms, depending on the party that we belong to. However, once the campaign is over, then an elected member of parliament is an elected member of parliament for everyone. So there is no partisanship in that regard. We're here for everyone. And the same applies to our government. This government is a government for all Canadians. And the government is elected based on its political platform. The speech from the throne expresses the roadmap that the government has set forth. And that is what a transparent and responsible government is. It is a government that clearly articulates to Canadians what it is planning to do, on what basis, in order to tackle the challenges that it is facing. And therefore, a prorogation allows a government to start programs and to shift, and that is completely acceptable and appropriate. Friends, the current government brought in a speech from the throne based on its political promises that it made during the elections of 2019. However, no one could have foreseen that there was a national pandemic coming, and that started here in March 2020. Within a few days, and you will all remember that week in March, within a few days, we were in Ottawa. I had organized actually a St. Patrick's Day party at Darcy McGee's. There was a whole group that was going, and it was the Monday. Yes, I can say, yes, there were some of us who were all there. There was beautiful music, and there were members from all parties. And there are some people who really sing well, I have to say. It was so pleasant, and I was so pleased that it was this successful, because within the space of a few days, Parliament closed down. Everything finished. No more parties. And we like our political parties, and we also like other kinds of parties, entertainment. However, it was the same for all Canadians. And for years and decades to come, we're going to remember this. And this is going to be an historical event that will be studied by people over and over again, including how we responded to this unprecedented health crisis. And so obviously the platform that we had brought in December 2019 really didn't apply anymore. There were plans and priorities. I just have a question for the chair. Is there going to be a vote sometime soon, or will you be warning us?
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you. I was thinking maybe you would end and I would make an announcement that the bell should be going off any minute now, and there will be a vote in the House.
Madam Chair?
Point of order,
yes.
Madam Chair.
Oh. Yes, Mr. Nader.
I think Mr. Kent and I were probably going to say the same thing. So I'll let Mr. Kent, who is far more articulate than I am, to make the comment.
Well, just a brief observation. Given that members all have the remote voting app, perhaps we could best use time by continuing Ms. Shanahan's remarks through bells.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe this committee would like to really surprise me by giving unanimous consent to continue through the bells. I would say I would be a little surprised. I definitely, when something productive is happening, committees would like to work through the bells to achieve, their goals. So it's up to you guys if you want to work through the bells. I don't see the notice yet for bells, but if you already give me unanimous consent, we can do so. Okay. Looks like nobody is saying otherwise, so we'll just go through the bells. All right, go ahead, Ms. Shanahan.
Excusez-moi, Madame
Madam Chair, I'm not comfortable continuing with my remarks when there's a vote. It's already difficult for me to figure out how to keep 2 Zoom sessions going, and technology doesn't come easily for me. So I don't know if we can do something else about that.
I require unanimous consent to carry on. Even if one of the members is not comfortable doing so, then we would just suspend for the bells and then resume after the vote is done.
Well, yeah.
Okay, and I don't think we are hearing the bells, so I guess you can continue. It was expected by 11:52, but maybe things are running a few minutes behind. So, Ms. Shanahan, if you want to carry on until the bells start ringing, and then we can suspend.
Okay, very good.
Right, then to continue, obviously, any plans and priorities and goals for that parliamentary session at the beginning of 2020 really fell by the wayside and were replaced with an urgent need to assist Canadians in order to get through the greatest international event that has occurred since the Second World War.
The bells are ringing currently, and we will resume after the vote is completed. Okay, so I'll see you all back. And Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor from where you left off.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. Donc, je vais continuer.
I am going to go on and keep talking about the idea of why a prime minister can and should make the decision to prorogue Parliament in some instances. The government needed to reset its priorities. The priorities we had early in 2020 were replaced by the urgent need of helping Canadians get through the most significant international event since World War II. So it is completely irrelevant after the first wave in the summer of 2020 for the government to determine whether it would still be possible to continue with its plan based on its plan established in December 2019. Nobody around this virtual table could pretend that it was not necessary to reset government's priorities. Once we started easing restrictions after the first wave of COVID-19, we had to focus on restarting the economy, continue planning vaccine distribution, because we had first indications of the vaccines becoming available from pharmaceutical companies. I'd like to pay my respects, by the way, to all healthcare professionals, researchers, scientists who worked around the clock to find a vaccine for COVID-19. All of that was going on. We were preparing for a possible second wave, and now, as we see, we have a third wave. But this time, several vaccines are available. So the government had to manage this new reality, this new context. It was a situation where it was necessary for a government to prorogue Parliament. We were told that it was a political decision. As I said earlier, politics is what we do every day here. The Prime Minister was accused of having made a political decision. And understandably so, other colleagues had different ideas about the intentions of the government at the time. It is always possible to debate a decision. However, this committee heard Mr. Rodriguez, who appeared before us. I can't remember exactly when, but what I know for sure is that he appeared before the committee to confirm the government's position that it is absolutely not necessary for the Prime Minister or his Chief of Staff to appear before us. Because, as was said before, and maybe it was the case here in this committee, but it was dealt with at the Ethics Committee, the Prime Minister has the prerogative to delegate its responsibilities under the principle of ministerial solidarity. So, Mrs. Vecchio's motion refers to the Prime Minister having responsibility, but as I said, the Prime Minister always has the prerogative to delegate his responsibilities, and the government House Leader came before the committee to explain the government's position instead of the Prime Minister and to take questions.
Let us be clear here. Dear colleagues, the opposition is saying that prorogation somehow was related to the We Charity affair. And I see that witnesses even asked that question. Opposition members want to call upon these witnesses to make a link with the We Charity. And this is absurd. Frankly, why would we hear these witnesses mentioned in Ms. Vecchio's motion, whereas the opinion of the Conservatives, the opposition opinion, is that all of these witnesses are already guilty of something. And this is why I want to talk about two witnesses in particular on the list, Madam Chair. And these witnesses are of concern to me. I don't understand. These witnesses are Farah Perlmutter and Martin Perlmutter. I can't understand how it is that we have members of the committee who are asking that we call upon Canadian citizens who are business people, who are taking care of their clients, their families, their customers during this pandemic. And here, we want to drag them into this situation, into this story, for partisan reasons only. We've already heard Mr. and Mrs. Perlmutter before the committee, and it was really a deplorable situation, and I'll tell you what happened. For those who aren't aware, they're the owners of Speaker Spotlight, which has been in operation for 25 years, and they are liaison agents between groups, organizations, seeking to get speakers. And Speaker Spotlight hires individuals to give conferences. It represents them and establishes the linkages. There is absolutely nothing nefarious or partisan in the context of this service, which, as a matter of fact, is used by all sorts of companies, organizations, volunteer organizations, etc. Why would we call these individuals as witnesses in the context of this study? It's nonsensical, and this is why I support Mr. Turnbull's amendment, because it is clear. And here, I'm going to talk to you about the appearance of Mr. and Mrs. Perlmutter. I'm going to explain to you how shameful the whole process was. It was shameful on the part of MPs to treat Canadians as they did in their case. There was absolutely nothing there. They weren't hiding anything, but they were treated as if they were guilty, and they were presented to the public as people that could be victimized in social media. They were threatened. They were attacked by people There are people in the public who are just looking for such opportunities. They just want an excuse to be able to go after someone. So these people were threatened. Their employees were threatened. People called them at their office to threaten them. And this was directly due to actions taken by members. I was so disappointed. I'm so disappointed in having to say this here because we're all colleagues, but there were Conservative MPs who played that game. And the paramooters even had to call the police because they were so grievously threatened in their workplace as well as in their home. People found their personal address. Those people have a family.
Yes.
A point of order. I fully support where she's going and understand, but in this motion that Mr. Turnbull has put forward, this isn't part of that. It is removing it, which I respect, but I'm just almost wondering relevance because she's talking about the Kilburg, or she's talking about weed. Kilburgers are actually in this motion. They too are private citizens. I'm just listening and just hoping that we can get back on to Mr. Turnbull's motion. Thank you.
Yeah, the Kilburgers are still in. You're right, and so is Bill Morneau, who's also a private citizen at this point, are in the amendment. But I do think she's still speaking to, whether she thinks that's a good idea or not. So it is relevant to what we have at hand. Maybe you'd like for her to reveal more of her position on it. But I mean, I think at this point, I would say that it's still relevant to the matter that we are speaking to. So in terms of relevance, I think there's not an issue at this time.
Merci.
Go ahead, Ms. Shanahan.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's regrettable, indeed regrettable, that there are members who don't want me to talk about the paramooters because they were placed in an awful situation, and I don't think we could apologize too much to them. When they appeared before Ethics on December 7th, the Liberals and the NDP apologized to those two individuals who told us about everything they had experienced personally. Madam Chair, it was a first for me in a committee, in a parliamentary committee, to be really ashamed, really, truly ashamed of participating in a situation where we were really dragging people under the bus.
In Mrs. Vecchio's motion, which is what is happening here again. So yes, I support the amendment of Mr. Turnbull to remove those two witnesses. When I think of what the paramooters, and they were not the only witnesses. I could go on about other witnesses that were dragged in front of the Ethics Commission. And I'm sure there's other members who have seen things happening in other committees because there were so many going on at the same time, you couldn't follow them all. What was the idea? Drag as many people in front of as many committees to try to find something that got you moment. And who were they trying to get? Innocent Canadians. It was disgusting. So for those who didn't understand what I was saying in French before, that's what I am saying now. Mrs. Paramuter was not leaving her house, not for isolation's sake. She was afraid to leave her house. The degree of harassment and intimidation that they were subjected to since last August 2020. And that's when Conservative MPs began publicly calling on the company to disclose speaking fees earned over the past 12 years by the Prime Minister, his wife, his mother, his brother, even though it would have contravened privacy laws. And I will continue in English because I want the members here to understand this. That is what was going on social media. In one Facebook post, which is still online, Deputy Conservative leader Candice Bergen provided the company's toll-free phone number and urged people to call to press the point. And what were they looking for? Records for the last 12 years. If that's not a witch hunt and a fishing expedition, I don't know what is. And ever since Mr. Perlmutter said that with that online harassment, and this is what he told us at his appearance December 7th, which happened after prorogation. So nothing was stopped because of prorogation. It continued. His company faced harassment, personal threats, a social media campaign that he described as designed to discredit him and his wife and damage their reputation, real harm against them, both against their reputation and indeed, as I have said, Madam Chair, even to their persons. And they were already struggling due to the COVID-19 pandemic. He said, as a leader of a small company, I feel that my first obligation is to ensure the physical, emotional, and mental health, safety, and well-being of our employees. For the first time in my 25-year career, I was in a situation where I didn't feel that I could properly protect everyone from what was going on. Imagine what he was going through. We had to get the police involved. It was a really nasty situation. What Canadian doing business, trying to survive the pandemic, asked for that? Perlmutter said one individual who responded to the Conservative call posted on Facebook his wife's photo and private cell phone number, along with a rant calling her disgusting and derogatory things. And so her phone started ringing day and night.
Sorry, Ms. Vecchio, did you accidentally go? Oh,
No, sorry. Point over. I fully respect this, but when she's talking about these photos, we've seen the exact same thing done to Charlie Angus. We have seen some of this, and yes, it's absolutely inappropriate. But I'm really hoping we can talk about...
We're talking about Mr. Turnbull's amendment, are we not?
Yeah, I think...
Wonderful, thank you.
I think, Ms. Vecchio, this is a point of debate, perhaps, more than a point of order.
If you'd allow me, Madam Chair. Since we're talking about the appearance of several witnesses, Ms. Shanahan is talking about this, and in the motion, we know that several names have been withdrawn from the motion of Ms. Vecchio, so perhaps people would be prepared to vote on Mr. Turnbull's amendment so that we might move on to another motion afterwards. I'm just putting the question in case people who are ready to vote, since we're discussing something that has changed. These individuals are not named in the motion we have with Mr. Turnbull's amendment.
Absolutely, the committee's prerogative if they'd like to continue to vote. This time, at this point, though, Ms. Shanahan has the floor. So I'll give the floor back to her. And when she doesn't have the floor, we can, if the committee likes, proceed to a vote, but it's up to the committee. And we do have other speakers on the list. I will let you know that we have, after this, Ms. Pettypat-Taylor, Mr. Turnbull, and then Mr. Sampson. Ms. Shanahan.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And I can understand that there are members of the opposition who don't want to hear what I have to say, but it's actually not what I have
for
to
3
say.
months. Of course we want to hear it.
It is ordinary Canadians who have been dragged into this, and they have a right to be heard. Mrs. Perlmutter was in fear of her own personal safety for a while. She didn't want to leave the house. And some of their 27 employees, particularly young women on staff, were also concerned about their safety. So maybe it's laughable to some members here. Maybe it's something that's not important, not germane to where they want to go. But this is what Canadians are in shock about. And this is why we are here. If in some measure, Chair, if in some measure I can protect at least a couple of Canadians from this kind of abuse, I will feel that my job has has been, and my time has been well spent, and that I am doing my job here. Mr. Perlmutter says he understands politics is a tough business, but he said that his company is not partisan. Again, the difference between politics, policy, and sheer partisanerie, just to score political points, drag anybody down with you, doesn't matter. We got to score those points. These people were unfairly caught in the crossfire. His company had only a tangential connection to the WE affair and had nothing to do with the student services grant at the heart of the controversy. The information they were looking for was from times that the Prime Minister and his wife, before he was Prime Minister, would have spoken to, I don't know, a Legion affair or a charity affair. It was ridiculous. It's something, Mr. Perlmutter goes on to say, it is something I thought we would never have to deal with. We're not in a controversial type of business. As part of its investigation into the affair, the Ethics Committee asked Speaker Spotlight to turn over documents related to any fees earned by the Prime Minister and his family members for speaking engagements over the past 12 years. At that time, Parliament was prorogued, and so the clerk informed Mr. Perlmutter that he had no longer had to submit the documents requested by the committee. Aha, says the opposition. There, you see, they wanted to stop those documents from being produced. That was the evil plan. At the same time, Conservative MP Michael Barrett sent the company a letter the following week, which he released to the media before Mr. Perlmutter said he had the chance to read it, asking him to do the right thing and turn over the documents directly to the members of the then disbanded committee. So you see, Mr. Barrett, he had a plan to get to the bottom of all of this nefarious wrongdoing. Perlmutter said the company's legal counsel informed him that releasing the documents in that manner without an order from the committee would violate privacy laws. We work by the rule of law. We have parliamentary tradition and parliamentary rules that we follow. And Mr. Perlmutter said he was upset that a member of parliament would ask the company to break the law. This is what he told the committee. And Ms. Bergen's Facebook post came shortly after Mr. Barrett publicly released his letter. By making the request public, Mr. Perlmutter said he definitely felt like he was being intimidated by Barrett. It is frankly quite shocking to me, to be completely honest, he said, adding that launching a lawsuit against Conservative MPs has certainly crossed my mind. That is where those Conservative MPs have brought us as parliamentarians. I don't know about you, Madam Speaker, and about other colleagues here, but my reputation, the honor, the privilege of being a parliamentarian is that what we do here is for the good of Canadians, and that we would never, never bring our position, our role. And I take my role as a parliamentarian on a committee when we ask for witnesses, when we require witnesses to appear, and anybody who's seen the work that we're doing on the MindGeek Pornhub will know that we are doing some very important work there, and we want to get to the bottom of those issues, because that's what's important to Canadians. But to use those same powers against ordinary innocent Canadians for partisan purposes, this is what I cannot condone. And I'm not one of those parliamentarians that gets up and rant and rave. So I think I may have surprised a few of my good friends here. This is what gets me. Innocent people being dragged in. Mr. Barrett participated in that committee hearing, but he did not address the matter. He did ask Mr. Perlmutter several questions about some specific speaking engagements. I am extremely disappointed and shocked, but maybe not surprised, well, this is me, say, that Mr. Barrett was present here and he did not use his time to offer a complete apology for his actions. That's what I said at the time. And Mr. Barrett, to give Mr. Barrett some time, the ample opportunity to do the right thing. He's so keen on doing the right thing. As I say, I and other members on the Liberal side and Mr. Angus, the NDP, did take that time to apologize to the Perlmutters. And the chair of the committee, and here I do say that Mr. Sweet, as chair of our Committee of Ethics, he did the right thing by offering a sincere apology on behalf of the committee for any of the unintended consequences that came from any actions of the committee members in regards to the obligations of our office. And then once the committee, remember where the prorogation had happened, that must have been the evil plan. But the committee was reconstituted in September after the prorogation was over, after we had the new throne speech, after we had done the reset. Our committee then sent a narrower request to Speaker Spotlight for records of the speaking fees earned by Mr. Trudeau and his wife. And the company complied with that request, and those records were provided to the committee members for a week. I think committee members are familiar with how that's done in privacy. We had all the time in the world to peruse them. And guess what? No one, including Mr. Barrett, asked any questions about those documents at our meeting in December. So that was the story of dragging in innocent witnesses with absolutely no connection to the matter at hand, except for a family name. Well, yeah, that'll be just enough. Dragged in front of the committee, and their reputation and their personal well-being just put up as fodder for the mill. Moi, je vais continuer.
I'm now going to continue by saying that the opposition within that committee continued. And the members here are doing the same thing. They're doing everything they can to draw a connection. Unfortunately, that's not going to go anywhere, Madam Chair. Canadians have understood the games that the Conservatives and their collaborators are playing, and they don't buy it. As a Canadian, and as Canadians, we will never accept that there be a decision that is made arbitrarily. That happens in other kinds of systems, but not here. And I think it's very interesting that opposition members, on the one hand, condemn dictatorships, authoritarian dictatorships that do not accept the principal main democratic laws, and yet here they're trying to encourage a process that does not respect fairness, legal fairness. We have a motion before us with such a broad scope and which is so inappropriate that we have no choice but to reject it. But my colleague, Mr. Turnbull, has come forward with an amendment, and it gives the opposition another opportunity to flog this dead horse. It gives it another chance to try and draw that connection. So we have the motion here, but it does not call the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff forward. And when I read the motion, I think it's very interesting. I think it's very interesting to see how flagrant this attempt is on the part of the opposition to hide its true motives behind a motion. I mean, one simply has to look at the dates. It shows that our colleagues are not actually interested in prorogation itself. It's simply trying to draw a connection between the We Charity to this study. You could still play that game if you approve the amendment, although the game might be a little more limited in its scope. I understand how frustrated opposition members must be because they have tried for months to make this an issue in several committees and in the media, and they haven't managed to. And now, once again, they're trying to make one last attempt to embarrass the government with respect to We Charity. That is their priority. They're calling for witnesses and documents. But this is simply an attempt to slow down the government's work and to drown civil servants in paperwork and to make them have to examine and re-examine documents and have all these documents go through the Translation Bureau, which is already overloaded, rather than focus on implementing government programs. I mean, it's rather ironic to see the leader of the opposition say that he wants the government to succeed in rolling out its vaccinations and in helping the economy recover. Well, he should speak to the members of his own party. He's letting the members of his party slow down government operations with frivolous concurrence motions. And what this does do is slow down the government's work. We need to move on, and Conservatives have to stop these games. And once again, we need to bring back the focus on what is important to Canadians: an economic recovery and emerging from the COVID-19 crisis. And with that, Madam Chair, I conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Ms. Petitpas-Taylor, you're next.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm going to cede the floor, and I believe that my friend and colleague, Ryan Turnbull, will be taking my place. Thank you.
Mr. Turnbull is next on the list. Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a hard act to follow in terms of following after my colleague, Ms. Shanahan, who I have great respect for. And I attended just a very couple of those meetings, just a very small number on the Ethics Committee. And I know that she's done great work on that committee. And thank you for speaking so passionately, Brenda. I too share many of your concerns when it comes to bringing forth private citizens. I will speak to my amendment, which does relate to that in just a moment. But before I get started, I just wanted to say that I'm sorry that I was away from the committee over the last 2 weeks. I want everyone to know that I wasn't avoiding this important and riveting debate. I was under the weather, but I'm feeling much better now, increasingly better every day. Just wanted to say a heartfelt thanks to my colleagues and my teammates who filled in for me while I was gone and checked in with me regularly. I really appreciate the fact that we have such a compassionate team. So I did, while I was resting and trying to get better, I probably held on to some vain hope that maybe a small grain of hope and optimism for returning and finding us having made progress on this motion and the proposed amendment. But alas, here we are still debating this. It's unfortunate, but But I do have quite a few remarks. I've had lots of time to reflect and had lots of thoughts prepared before I fell ill and was away for a little while that I'd like to get on the record. First of all, the amendment that I put forward was an attempt to compromise. You have to give something to get something. But the members of the opposition on this committee, I think, have to give too. And so far, I don't think there's been a willingness to be flexible and to give a little on the original motion. I really don't think we need to hear from the Kielburgers and the Honorable Bill Morneau. Like, let's be honest. I think Ms. Shanahan's comments are really, I think, poignant, and I think point to the harm that can be caused inadvertently, of course. It's not necessarily intentional, but it is harm that that members of the public, that private citizens, business owners, etc., can experience as a result of being called before these committees. And I think that's an important consideration. Now, I left those two invitations, those renewed invitation in the proposed amendment as a way to say to the opposition parties, okay, here is something, perhaps that would appeal to your interests, which I think, clearly we all know are for partisan purposes. But or at least I suspect that based on all of the comments that I've heard. What I really think is the added testimony from the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth would actually be really relevant to extending this study, and hearing from them would add to the testimony something perhaps that we haven't heard before. I think the witnesses that so these witnesses I think are important because we can get a sense of the depth and breadth of the economic impact, as well as the significant data and evidence, not to mention the firsthand experiences relayed to us from our constituents about the inequities, vulnerabilities that Canadians are living with or experiencing due to COVID-19, which is a reason why the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth would be appropriate in my view, because this is her expertise, this is her mandate and file. We also know that economic impacts have not been distributed evenly across our economy. They've been quite the opposite. They've been distributed unevenly. And, it goes without saying that I think we've all heard this over and over again, that some industries have been decimated while others have prospered. Some will bounce back quickly, and others will take years to return to pre-pandemic levels. I remember in one of the previous meetings before I was away, Mr. Blakey made a comment about I think he said the pandemic all matters. And I don't mean to quote him out of context because it was within what he was saying, and I'm sure he didn't mean this, but it seemed to me that it sort of implied in his remarks that that the pandemic was the distraction from what the opposition was really looking for in this study. And I think only a party focused on playing political games would characterize a global pandemic as an afterthought or a distraction. I think the pandemic clearly is what we all, and certainly this committee, needs to be completely seized with at every moment and focused on. We are in a third wave. We are in a third wave of a global health crisis of epic proportions, and Canadians need us and care that their government is working for them at all levels to, essentially meet their needs and protect them from the worst parts of this crisis, or help them get through this. Canadians are rightfully exhausted by this and are counting on us to help. We can't afford to be looking backwards and distracted with partisan games, which is really, what this motion, original motion, is about. So, I think extending it with a couple of witnesses is a more than reasonable solution. It's an attempt at compromise, but I see that this doesn't satisfy the opposition. I want to quote something. There's a gentleman that I heard recently, who I'm sure some of my other colleagues probably know and admire. In a recent interview, Dr. Michael Ryan, the executive director from the World Health Organization's Health Emergencies Program, said, and I'll quote him, "What we've learned from the Ebola outbreaks is that you need to react quickly. You need to go after the virus. You need to stop the chains of transmission. You need to engage with communities very deeply. Community acceptance is hugely important. You need to be coordinated and coherent. You need to look at the other sectoral impacts, the schools, security, and the economic impacts." So it's essentially many of those same lessons, he said. The lessons I've learned from so many Ebola outbreaks in my career are: be fast, have no regrets. You must be the first mover. The virus will always get you if you don't move quickly. And you need to be prepared. I say this, one of the great things in emergency response, and anyone who is involved in emergency response will know this: if you need to be right before you move, you will never win. Perfection is the enemy of the good, which is something our Prime Minister says often when it comes to emergency management. Speed trumps perfection. And the problem in society that we have at the moment, and he's speaking to this global pandemic, is everyone is afraid of making a mistake. Everyone is afraid of the consequence of error. But the greatest error is not to move. The greatest error is to be paralyzed by the fear of failure. And I think it's the single biggest lesson I've learned in Ebola responses in the past. So that's what Dr. Michael Ryan said in a recent interview. And I just thought, wow, this is powerful advice. It really speaks to the need for us to move quickly, to focus on the future, not the past, not to be debating for months a motion that has absolutely no relevance to managing the crisis that we're in. It is nothing but a political game. And the opposition parties, for some reason, persist. I understand they want to win political points and get an uptick in the polls. I understand that. I understand that there's partisanship here, and it's always present. But can we not put that aside and focus on what really matters? Like, we're heading into a wall and we're looking in the rearview mirror instead of focused on preparing for the fourth wave. I hope we don't have a fourth wave. But my colleague, Dr. Duncan, and people who have studied virology and understand pandemics, like, there's so much work for us to be doing. I'm lying in bed for 2 weeks trying to get better. And all I can think about is, how can I possibly rest when there is so much damn work to do that matters to people out there in the world that they're counting on me and us to do for them? And here we are. What is it, 1 month later, still debating? I don't know how many weeks it's been, but it seems like forever to me, because there's so many more pressing things coming into my constituency office. So many other things, even within this committee, that we could be focusing on. You know, it's just disheartening, to say the least. I really, really say it's disheartening. Now, some of my colleagues on this committee have made it seem like this is just a matter of how much time we use for this study. But I think it's more than that. It's about what we invest our time in, what we choose to spend our time on. We are making decisions about what to focus on, and we know that standing committees are masters of their own domain. We could be pursuing other more important topics. And there's a long list.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Kent, are you going to say let's vote then?
Well, no, not at all. And I respect Mr. Turnbull's passionate words. But with regards to his urgings that the committee vote to invite Minister Freeland and Minister Chagger to appear before committee, has he spoken to them about the committee's open invitation, to which they have still not responded?
Okay, I guess it's an interjection of some sort, but I'll give the floor back to Mr. Turnbull. I can tell you
Chair,
from my position.
It was just to Mr. Turnbull's point of the value of time. And I would think that if they responded to an existing committee invitation, that time would be addressed.
And I guess again, I can put on the record that I have no responses at this point from any of the previous invitations. Mr. Turnbull, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, and great question. And I have not heard anything from them to date, but I think this is the whole point of the motion that I put forward, or the amendment, I should say, is to I think focus our time on something reasonable that adds a little bit more testimony, if that's the wish of the committee, but that doesn't extend too far into the witch hunt that I think the opposition parties are looking for. The fishing expedition, as my colleague Ms. Shanahan called it, and that's how I would characterize it too. So thank you for the question, Mr. Kent. Definitely appreciate it. And I just want to continue with my remarks here. So the list is long. The committee did a study. I think some exceptional work was done on preparing for the possibility of a pandemic election. Now, we know that that's only going to happen if opposition parties thrust that upon the government, because there's no way that we want an election during a global pandemic. But Bill C-19 has been tabled in the House. I understand it's still being debated, but I think we could be doing a pre-study on that bill, which would help expedite its passage through second reading. And I think that would be a much better use of our time. Another priority that my honorable colleague, Dr. Duncan, has raised is evaluating the effectiveness and I think infection prevention and control measures on Parliament Hill, and a whole bunch of other factors related to looking at how we responded during the pandemic. And I think that's useful for helping us prepare for future waves or future pandemics. And I think that's a really important one. I understand my colleague, Ms. Pettypot Taylor, also put a motion on notice that I think has lots of relevance. And I too have put another motion on notice that focuses on another topic, which I think would be much more, relevant for us to be focused on. It's the one that focuses on the Ontario Superior Court decision to strike down changes to the Elections Act that help protect Canadians against misinformation during elections.
Point of order. If we can get back to the motion, thank you.
Mr. Turnbull.
So I think, I have great concerns about within the election process, just the amount of misinformation that I've witnessed. Certainly in my riding, I had the Conservative Party of Canada fund flyers that went to every primary residence in my riding that provided misinformation to the public. It was funded, it was actually stamped by the Conservative Party in the last election.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
And it really concerns me because, of course, it's a part of election readiness, and we know that it's relevant.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Vecchio.
If I recognize that we're talking about other things that we could be studying, but if we could get back to the motion, that'd be great. A little point on, but it just seemed to get a little bit more elaborated than necessary.
Okay. Point noted, I guess. Mr. Turnbull.
I do think this is relevant because, what I'm advocating for here is an amendment to the original motion, which narrows the scope of the original motion that was put forward, which would free up our time to focus on other items. So it is relevant to the argument that I'm making. And I do think that, again, there are much more important tasks that, in my view, and I think many of the members on the Liberal Party at least would agree with me, that there is a much better use of our time that Canadians would appreciate us focusing on. So the misinformation in elections and deliberate misinformation, I think, is an issue that we all need to be concerned about, especially given the times that we're living in, which is a time where people are consuming a lot more information online. And I think there's a lot more partisanship. I think there's lots of polarization within our democratic society. And I think that's deeply concerning to me, especially given what we saw happen around the election in the United States, which I think we can all agree it would be good for us to be addressing, I think, some of the root causes and looking at how we can avoid making some of the same mistakes that perhaps have precipitated the insurrection in the United States. So I'll leave it at that, but on those points anyways, I have lots more to say. But on the back to the original motion by Ms. Vecchio, I think, you know, it's been said, but I need to say it myself with conviction, is that the motive seems, you know, that it seems to be assumed that the opposition is assuming that prorogation couldn't have happened for basically legitimate purposes. But I find that so hard to believe because, you know, if a pandemic, a global pandemic, is not a good reason for proroguing, then what is a good reason, Madam Chair? Like, what's a good reason? So honestly, I can't think of a bigger crisis and issue. If Stephen Harper and his government can prorogue twice, one in 2008, one 2009, and cite their economic recession as their primary reason for proroguing, and certainly everyone suspected that there were more partisan reasons and political reasons for doing those things, but I mean, legitimately, they cited that as their reason. So why is it in a global pandemic of epic proportions, the biggest crisis in 100 years, can we not see a rational justification for proroguing Parliament? I will go further in my remarks and will say there is no justification for prorogation that will satisfy the opposition parties because they're not interested in evidence, facts, data, arguments, reasons, or reality. This is not about facts and getting to the truth. This is about pure partisanship. Facts and reasonable arguments be damned. It seems that conservatives have a tendency and a growing fascination with adopting views and positions which have no basis in evidence and reality. If it's evidence you want, the committee has tabled or has received a report, a substantive report on the reasons for prorogation, and has heard from a selection of witnesses, and the majority of those were of their choosing. Okay, the majority of them were ones, our witness list was almost none. I don't think we even submitted any witnesses. So the opposition parties are the ones that submitted the whole long list of witnesses that they want to hear from, or wanted to hear from, and many of those came forward and attended the committee, and they had ample opportunity to ask questions. I've put forward a motion that allows a few more witnesses to be re-invited, which is a compromise, but still no movement. They want the Prime Minister. They've got a vendetta against Justin Trudeau. This is not about anything other than a ploy to spin a story, get a headline, cause a small uptick in the polls. We know what this is about. This is all at the expense of the Canadian public. The public is relying on us. I shouldn't even be laughing because it's just absurd that we're here and that I'm speaking to this in a way. Let me again represent my views on prorogation that are supported by the evidence and facts. So I've maintained and argued that the social and economic impacts of COVID-19 are deeper and more substantial, in fact, many times greater, exponentially more severe, at least 10 times greater, at least, according to many experts and our own chief statistician on many of the indicators, than the 2008-2009 recession. So that recession, again, was cited by Stephen Harper as the reason for 2 prorogations. So, and some would say to avoid a confidence vote, and there's other reasons, but I would just say, well, if those were good reasons for the Conservative Party back then, why is it so unbelievable to cite the same sorts of reasons for the prorogation, the most recent one? And I think this is why, from my perspective, hearing from the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, would be beneficial, because who else can speak to the significance of the economic impact? And similarly, I thought having the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth come testify might help illuminate the many inequities that COVID-19 has laid bare. This makes sense. You know, in fact, it's common sense in my view. And if you were looking for the truth, looking for facts and information that were relevant, I think that would be more than acceptable to focus on. And let us not forget that it was our government in the last Parliament that made the change to the standing orders that led to the submission of a report that provided a rationale for prorogation. For the first time ever in history of our great country, we have a report tabled in the House of Commons, referred to this committee, that we've all had a chance to review. Let that sink in for a minute, colleagues and Madam Chair. Never before has any Prime Minister or government in Canada's history been required to provide a reason for proroguing Parliament. Never have they had to write and table a report. Never has PROC had to study such a matter. I mean, I think there's probably been some other studies that were decided by the Standing Committee, but it was never required. Mr. Blakey has remarked several times that this would be a precedent setting. And I think we've already set the precedent to a much higher standard and to a higher degree of transparency by having a report be something that's necessary, by following through on that, and even entertaining a study. We weren't required to have a study on prorogation just because a report was tabled. This committee chose to do that. We were willing partners in that pursuit. We voted to support that. We heard from witnesses, but now this is still not good enough. It's still not enough. Why? Because the opposition members didn't hear what they wanted to hear. So I don't even know whether I haven't even heard, to be honest, I haven't even heard opposition members speak to the merits of the report that was tabled. So if you were really concerned about that report being deficient in some way, you would be able to provide me with real reasons and arguments as to why it was deficient. Where is it deficient? It provides a great rationale that's, I think very sensical. And very much based on evidence and research. So I think the opposition members have been decided from day one what they want to get out of this, and never for a second have they entertained any other possibility. So I have mountains of evidence to demonstrate proroguing Parliament made sense, that has led to a process of consultation and reevaluation, that it was timed perfectly between the first and second wave, and to reduce any losses in sitting days in the House of Commons, that the priorities and themes of the throne speech and the specifics of the fall economic statement and the budget all reflected what we heard from Canadians. It's responsive, it makes sense, it's backed by data and evidence. It's consistent with the report that was tabled and the testimony given by the government House Leader. What more does the opposition need or want? If this were about reason and evidence, this would have been over a long time ago. The timing made sense. The first and second wave, between the first and second wave of COVID-19, we took some time. After many months of all hands on deck, full court press, agenda supporting Canadians. So, we were moving an agenda forward that supported Canadians. Everyone was working full steam ahead. So we took a hiatus, a time to reassess priorities, reset the agenda. Does that not make sense between the first and second wave? It seems to make sense to me. Madam Chair, I think any Canadian listening in, I think, could understand that this government had been working around the clock to serve Canadians, getting supports and programs designed in weeks instead of years, and took some time to reevaluate priorities at a time when Parliament would normally not be sitting anyway. between the first and second wave of the pandemic. It just makes sense. So why can't the opposition compromise a little on their original motion? Now, opposition parties act like they haven't had a chance to study prorogation, but we've had numerous meetings on the topic. We've heard from the government House Leader, who was willing to attend and answered our questions. We heard from multiple other witnesses that testified before this committee. It was fair and transparent. All members had a chance to ask questions. The opposition provided its list of witnesses, and they now have testimony from academics, procedural experts, historians, officials, and the government House Leader. We've got material that can be used to write a report. Some of the opinions shared by witnesses even favor the opposition's preferred interpretation. So why can't we move to writing a report? They already have some evidence or some opinion, I would say, that supports their narrative. So what more do they need? The opposition has also over and over and over again claimed that the throne speech had no substance, which I emphatically deny, and I say is false. But they still won't listen or concede that the throne speech has substantive themes and very specific measures that reflect the needs of Canadians. Well, Madam Chair, it is in fact true that it outlines priorities that relate directly to the information gathered by the Chief Statistician of Canada and the extensive consultation that was done during the time that our government was prorogued. And just to be clear, our caucus was not on vacation during the time of prorogation. We weren't twiddling our thumbs or sitting on our hands. There were many, many stakeholder consultations, constituent surveys, caucus consultations, meetings with opposition parties, departmental and interdepartmental discussions were had during that time, all of which helped to inform the throne speech. Again, this led to themes that appeared in the throne speech that were new and whose relevance was directly tied to the pandemic and its deep and far-reaching impacts, and evidence-based. Notable examples include additional supports for small businesses, the wage subsidy, the commercial rent subsidy, and their redesign, improvements to the Canada Business Credit Availability Program, expansion of the CEBA, huge supports for small businesses. I've heard over and over and over again how these have literally saved so many businesses, of our small businesses, from going under due to the effects of this pandemic and the public health restrictions that were necessary to protect Canadians. Supports for workers, the wage subsidy, the Canada Recovery Benefit, and essential reforms to EI were outlined in the throne speech. They were not in the previous throne speech. They were new initiatives that were a direct result of taking some time to reflect on what Canadians needed. Supports for the hardest hit industries. And we know there's a long list of industries that have been hard hit: hospitality and tourism, retail, cultural industries. The list goes on and on. National standards for long-term care weren't in the original throne speech. This was something I've spoken to before. My colleague, Mr. Lauzon, who's not here today, but speaks very passionately and is the parliamentary secretary for the Minister of Seniors, and he spoke to this as well. But those national standards for long-term care were in the throne speech, and they were a direct result of the consultation that was done. And many of my colleagues and I advocated for that national standard to be in the throne speech, and we're quite happy to see the fact that it got in there. So no one can say, and these are just a few, I'm going to give you other examples too. Addressing systemic racism was not in the previous throne speech. And there are numerous actions that were outlined, and I'm very, very proud that appeared in the throne speech after prorogation, that it was a direct result of realizing the inequities that many racialized Canadians and many others were experiencing due to the pandemic. And it's not that they weren't experiencing those before. They in fact were for generations, but that the pandemic and its impacts laid bare, and showed us and taught us all about just how deep those inequities are and how deep racial injustice is in our country. And so that appeared in the throne speech and wasn't there before. And it's something I'm very proud of and I take very seriously, and I think speaks to the responsiveness of a government that took the time to reflect and say, what do Canadians need us to be focusing on? How is our agenda and our priorities shifting and changing? Now, those some of the things in there are, some of them are already underway, which is incredible. So I'm particularly passionate about the inclusive and diverse public procurement, which has been an area of passion for me for a long time. But seeing that in the throne speech was something I felt very, very fond of, and I guess very pleased to see. But taking action on online hate, making sure that we have disaggregated data so we can see the inequities better and identify how those play out and how we can then develop policies based on that information. The action plan to increase representation in hiring and appointments in public service takes steps to acknowledge artistic and economic contributions of Black Canadians. That was in there. Justice system reforms to address the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous and people of color in our justice system. Training for police and law enforcement. Like, these things are incredible steps towards realizing greater degrees of justice in our country and eliminating, to the greatest degree possible, systemic racism. And yet the opposition parties still continue to maintain that our throne speech had no substance to it, that it was no different, that we didn't need the time to reflect and reevaluate. Well, I mean, would these themes and important measures be a priority for our government if we didn't take that time and do that work? And I would say maybe not. So, and what about gender equality? The action plan for women in the economy, the Canadian-wide early learning and childcare system, an acceleration of the women's entrepreneurship strategy. These were all in the throne speech. I know our government is deeply committed to realizing greater degrees of gender equity and gender equality and have been working on that from day one. But to have these specific measures identified confirms continued action and continued priority on realizing gender equality in Canada, which again is something we've learned
Point of
through
order,
this
Madam Chair.
pandemic.
Yes, Mr. Nader.
Sorry to interrupt, but I noticed Mr. Turnbull was talking about gender equality and gender equity. And I do notice that we have a new member of the committee with us, Ms. McCrimmon, and I wonder if she might want to take the opportunity to apologize for shutting down the National Defense Committee meetings, which were looking at issues of sexual misconduct in the military.
Point of order.
I don't think, it's an appropriate point of order, Mr. Nader, and I think you know as well. Mr. Turnbull, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think the other thing that appears in the throne speech that I'm also very passionate about and pleased to see was the disability inclusion plan. And there was a threefold commitment to income support, employment support, and changes to eligibility criteria, which in the throne speech were very welcome. And lastly, I'll say that the throne speech also had the term "Build Back Better." And I know opposition parties, and I'll speak to this a little bit more later, but opposition parties have claimed that this is some token phrase. And they've said this over and over again. And I adamantly, I'll fight you to the end of the earth on that one and argue till the day I die, because this is literally the most important thing that we need to do, in my view, is to build back better. That message is not a token phrase. It refers to realizing the many deep impacts and inequities and the ways in which our economy doesn't support full social and environmental responsibility. And I think it's referring to building our economy in a more intentional way so that it really supports people and the planet. And I think, to me, this is not, socialism and communism, and the opposition parties and the conspiracy theorists out there will tell you this is the Great Reset. It's not the Great Reset. It's dealing with the very specific ways in which our systems are flawed and that are impacting people and the planet and creating the massive inequities and injustices that we see, and jeopardizing our future and our children's future. And so, things that were in the throne speech related to Build Back Better in that message are exceeding Canada's 2030 climate goal, which we've seen our government put forward a new ambition, an ambitious target for, a better target. And I want to be more ambitious about that, and as ambitious as we could possibly be about that. But I think this is really important, and that was in the throne speech. A new fund to attract investments in zero emissions products and to make Canada a leader in clean technology. And I will say more about this because it's an area that I feel very, very strongly and passionately about. And I think we still have lots of work to be done and have to go much further. But again, I just want to reiterate that I find it just doesn't respect the value of that Build Back Better phrase. I know it sounds like a key message or a marketing strategy, but it's a very, I think, a small packet of words that has a lot of meaning to it. And for me, it really is important. And I think it's really what we heard from a lot of constituents. Certainly in my riding, I have many climate activists and people that want serious and progressive change to be made on addressing climate change, and feel that this pandemic is a wake-up call for us to begin to realize just how better prepared we need to be and how much better our systems and our politics and political system has to work to address major crises that we have not addressed over many generations, that have been accumulating in importance, and we've left it to the bitter end. And we can't do that anymore. We can't do that. We can't let literally we just have to collaborate and find ways to address the impending climate disaster that I know climatologists have been predicting for at least 20 or 30 years. It's probably even more than that. I know I have a colleague that was a part of Pollution Probe, which is one of the first environmental organizations, and he was one of the co-founders of that. And so he's been actively working towards climate action for over 40 years, and been frustrated, and is now retired, but still active no matter what. Anyway, look, I want to get back to my main argument, and I feel like I have so much to say, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I also was away for 2 weeks reflecting, so I kind of have accumulated a lot of things have been percolating, and I really value the opportunity to express myself fully and give my point of view, which I know is part of my responsibility, which I take very seriously. So let me tell you a little bit more about my argument, and I think why we need to get on with things, but also hear from at least the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth. I'm not going to speak too much more to Kielburgers and the Honourable Bill Morneau, because in my view, I left those re-invitations in there to simply compromise with Ms. Vecchio and the Conservative Party members. And so I really want to speak to my argument as to why it's so important for us to hear from just two more witnesses. I think it would be valuable. And this speaks to the heart of my amendment or my proposed amendment. So again, I'm going to go back to a document I've referred to multiple times before because I love data. I'm a bit of a data nerd, but I just think that that we have to base, what we're doing on research and data. It's the Social and Economic Impacts of COVID-19 report. It was a 6-month update. It was produced and published by the Chief Statistician of Canada in September 2020. So the reason I'm referring to that particular report is that it gives us insight because this whole thing is looking backwards in time and talking about why we prorogued. We're looking at, okay, that report takes statistical information from understanding the social and economic impacts up to about August, and then produces a report on it in September. So it's really would have been, I think, some of the most relevant and substantive information that we had at the time. And so why I think that's relevant and important is that it really demonstrates why the government would do the things that it did and how that information factored into resetting the agenda during prorogation, which is reflected in the throne speech. So I'm going to try and just quickly summarize the main findings, and then I'll go into some more detail. So the main findings, I would say, and I'm going to try and summarize it as 3 major findings, but there's a lot more to say about each one of these. I think I could probably talk for 2 or 3 meetings on each one of these, but let's just start with the first one. Is there's the evidence collected shows that there's a depth of economic impact that's been unprecedented in every category, and also uneven and inequitable across industries, which I've already said, but there's a lot more information on the extent of that economic impact and the depth of it, which I think is pretty substantive. So, for example, it's uneven across industries. The declines in outputs are 5 times greater than 2008, and that was only in August of 2020. Just think, we've been through the second and now the third wave of this pandemic. So the economic impact of COVID-19 has been far, far greater, at least 10 times greater. It could be even more than that by now. I haven't looked at the most recent statistics yet. There was a historic decline in all economic activity. This comes directly from that chief statistician's report. It doesn't matter what measure we use. There's a historic decline in imports, exports, business investment, household spending, real GDP, and market prices. The recovery is also uneven. So in other words, that as we saw some industries bounce back between the first and second wave, for example, retail industries started to bounce back much more quickly than some of the other industries. But so just the way in which how resilient different industries are to this specific type of shock to the economy is very uneven and different. So it requires a lot of, I think, exploration and reflection and data gathering. And I remember at that time I was saying, well, what is the economic impact of all of this? And at that time, I remember in August, I didn't know about this chief statistician report. It was only later that I found it and really find it valuable. But there's also historic declines in the labor market activity. There's steep losses in the highest impacted sectors. So we can think about retail, cultural industries, hospitality, tourism, and many others. There's many others. And I have that data here as well. There's also structural challenges in heavily impacted sectors. So, and that impacts the recovery of some of those heavily impacted sectors. So it's not only that they had, the highest losses, but they also have structural challenges within them in terms of recovering. It's also led to an overall context of business uncertainty, which the report goes into quite a few details about. So I think, this is just the economic impact. So understanding how historic those declines are and how significant and deep the economic scarring was, or the potential for economic scarring was, highlights the importance really of hearing from the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland. And it really, like understanding that depth of economic impact. And I'm not even speaking to the health impacts, which are really the most important parts of all of this, which I know my colleagues, Dr. Duncan and Ms. Pettypot-Taylor have spoken to in previous meetings. And I feel just as passionately about those, and I perhaps will bring more comments on those at a later time. But because they've focused on those areas and are extremely knowledgeable and have expertise in that area and are very eloquent, I'm focusing on the economic and social impacts in my remarks today. So the other finding of the report, and again, major finding, is the inequity. So if you were struggling or on the margins before this pandemic, it only got worse. And this includes the impacts on women, immigrants, visible minorities, people with disabilities, low-wage workers, youth, and the list goes on and on. There are other groups, but those are some of the main ones that are identified in the statistical data that was provided by the chief statistician. So again, this, when I spoke to what was in the throne speech and hearing, the evidence and data, you can see how those, you can draw direct links between them. Like I could create a map if you wanted me to, which I like to do, and I could draw, lines between things and make those associations and connections. Like this is reasonable for a rational person and someone who's very much interested in research and evidence-based thinking and policy solutions. Like this all connects. It adds up. If there was something fishy going on or some other nefarious activity, things probably wouldn't add up so well. They wouldn't make sense. They wouldn't be rational. There wouldn't be all of these very logical conclusions and arguments that could be made. Okay? And so this is, again, why I think it's so important for me at least, to provide these sort of rational arguments and draw these connections, because again, it goes to the heart of what this study is supposed to be about, that we're now debating a motion and debating an amendment on, and that I'm trying to be very reasonable about when the opposition parties keep claiming that, we don't want to study this or do that or provide reasons, or they're assuming all of these motives. And I'm going, well, we've provided evidence and rationale. We've been transparent. It makes sense. So what do you want? Anyway, I digress on that. But anyways, back to the point I was making is that there's three main points that I drew, or three main conclusions, I should say, that I drew from the evidence that the chief statistician provided. And the last one is the looming existential threat of climate change. It's not mentioned that way in the report, but what's mentioned in the statistics is just how much the environmental services, clean tech industries are almost pandemic proof or shock proof, that they represent these massive economic opportunities for a country that's in the deepest economic crisis probably since the Great Depression. So what's interesting is the evidence shows that those industries really represent a lot of hope and opportunity for us, not to mention help us. So not only do they create the economic growth and prosperity that we're looking for after such deep scarring and hardship that's been experienced by Canadians, but they also are the right thing to do when we think about this pandemic as a wake-up call to the impending climate disaster that will be coming in the near future if we don't wake up and actually act in the way that Dr. Michael Ryan was speaking to when I gave that quote, with the same degree of urgency and immediacy that's required for this pandemic. That's the kind of full court press we need for fighting climate change. And I would say I think our party and the throne speech and the data support that not only being the right thing to do, but for many reasons, but also that it also represents some of the biggest economic opportunities for our country. So when we say that the environment and the economy go hand in hand, this is why. I mean, there's actually evidence to suggest that makes sense too. So, I want to speak a little bit more about the inequities because I think I spoke to. Well, actually, let me say a few words just briefly about the economic impact, because I covered some things that I wanted to say in previous comments that I gave in other meetings, but I didn't cover everything that I wanted to say. And there are quite a few, I think, important impacts. One in particular that I feel pretty passionately about is the level of business uncertainty that the pandemic has created for business owners and entrepreneurs. Just in terms of May 2020. So this is March, April, May, like 3 months into the pandemic. A quarter of the businesses had been granted rent or mortgage deferrals. So at this point, it's probably way higher than that. But just think about them being granted mortgage or rent deferrals at the time. This was before I think we had the rent subsidy, and it was redesigned later on, which I think worked much better and was again another example of our government, I think, listening and responding to the needs of businesses. But just having those deferrals add up, and remember, like, a deferral is a deferral. You still got to pay for a small business. And I was a small business owner for 12 years and helped other small businesses. I've helped over 250 small businesses get started. I only worked with businesses that had a triple bottom line, ones that believed in social and environmental impact and integrated that sense of sustainability into their business models. And that's my specialty. So for me, thinking about business uncertainty and the impact of this pandemic and the kinds of opportunities that it creates, but also, I think how our government is responding to that. I think it's important to understand the kinds of uncertainties that businesses are facing, or I should say we're facing at that time when we prorogued. There's also evidence in the Chief Statistician's report that says many businesses will be reluctant to invest in the near term, and that means invest in their own businesses. So they talked about businesses trying to protect their balance sheets and debt service. So the idea is that many businesses have planned expenditures they've planned investments in their businesses as they make a profit, and they put the money back in their business to continue developing. It might be opening new branches, facilities. It could be HR, like personnel. There's all kinds of system improvements and operational pieces of their business that they might be planning to invest in the near future. I remember as an entrepreneur going from a sole proprietor to a corporation to a mid-sized consulting firm over 12 years, that was, you did business planning in order to anticipate the growth, and then you hustled to meet these targets, and so that you had enough as an entrepreneur or business owner to invest back in your business so you could continue to grow and develop and achieve your mission and purpose as a business. And so just think about the fact that many businesses were reluctant to plan any expenditure and were sort of buffering, protecting their balance sheet by saying we're not going to spend any money. Think about what that says about our economy. 17% had an annual decrease in private sector capital spending as well. Firms sharply downgraded their capital spending plans. So private sector decreased planned capital spending by 16.6%, which is equivalent to 178 billion to 147 billion. So they went from, so that's an only 16.6% decrease, which seems small at this point, because now after a second and third wave, I'm sure that that's much, much, much higher, and I don't have that number for you right now. But I think the chief statistician most recent update would probably provide a useful comparator for us to understand the trend. But for now, just know that at the time in August, it was, literally $30 billion hit to private sector capital spending. That's huge. 39% decrease in planned capital spending for accommodation and food services. 39% decrease in that industry. So it was much greater in some industries versus others. 27.2% decrease in capital spending planned for oil and gas industry is another example. Also, small service-based companies were disproportionately impacted. 3/4 of small businesses have taken on debt as a result of COVID-19. I'm sure, again, that number is much higher today, but that's at the time, 75% of small businesses had taken on debt. You can just think about how that's going to impact their ability to recover. When you have no ability, some of those businesses have told me, like, it'll be a miracle if we come roaring out of this pandemic with economic recovery. It'll be almost a miracle if they can service the debt that they've accumulated over the course of the first, second, and third wave of this pandemic. And that's why I've been a vocal advocate for COVID zero, which is a different approach than some of our provinces and territories have taken. But I think the Atlantic provinces have shown us the light and the way in terms of managing the pandemic, where we don't have the open, close, open, close, open, close disruption, continuation of our economy and our society over and over and over again. Anyway, that's a bit of a side note. Back to the small service-based companies that have been disproportionately impacted, but 68% of those with debt estimate it will take them more than 1 year to pay that debt off. So that was, again, in August of 2020. So a lot's happened since then. I think, if 68 or almost 70% would take a year to pay off their debt at that time, just think about how many years it's going to take them now, because that debt has only gotten greater through the open, close of our economy. New firms and startups. So this is one, again, that I was highlighting before that I know all too well. But since 2015, when our Liberal government or Liberal Party formed government in 2015, the number of new firms, so new business startups entering the market, was 16,500 on a quarterly basis on average. So that's every 3 months, there were 16,500 new businesses in Canada on average from 2015 until the time that this report was written in September. And startups account for 45% of gross domestic product. So 45% of the output of our economy essentially is new startup businesses. There were 88,000 business closures in April of 2020 and 62,600 closures in May due to COVID-19. Now, those are closures, not bankruptcies or anything. Those businesses closed down. So it's not to say that they necessarily went completely out of existence or folded up, but they closed down. And so you can see how many businesses were impacted. There were 100,000 fewer active businesses in May of 2020 compared to May of 2019. 100,000 fewer active businesses. That's just like unheard of. Instead of, just think about how many businesses are going the opposite direction, whereas we had 16,500 new businesses being started up every quarter in Canada since 2015. Now we have the reverse direction which is all these 100,000 fewer active businesses in May of 2020 compared to the previous year. That's just I don't know if we can even really fathom, but like I spent 12 years working with about 250 businesses, and I can tell you the work that those people put in to building their businesses and to have that all be lost due to a public health crisis is just it's just astronomical. It's very hard to fathom the depth of that impact and how far-reaching it is and how much it impacts those family-owned businesses and those individual entrepreneurs and those small partnerships and franchises and so many businesses, good people working their tails off to make a living and do something that they believe in that's often good for the community, good for the economy, and good for them at the same time. Business failures among small firms dwarfed the lack of new entrants. So again, the amount of failures in the economy of those small businesses was far, far greater than any new startups during the pandemic. There's a quote in the chief statistician's report that says the pace of job recovery will depend in large part on the extent to which companies can remain viable. And that's on page 66. It goes without saying that, if our small businesses make up such a huge portion of our economy and have such, employ the largest number of people in our economy, they're sort of literally, I would say, the engine of our Canadian economy, and we're seeing that many failures out there, or that many closures, and not as many new entrants. We're going to have a severe problem, right? That's long term. So our measures and supports that our government launched and we're in the throne speech were designed specifically to help the most number of those small businesses get through this crisis. And for me, I've heard over and over and over again that the wage subsidy, the CERB for some small businesses where they were family run or sole proprietors, these were life-saving measures and supports and financial assistance for them. The rent assistance, that commercial rent assistance, and how the program was redesigned. And this work was done after prorogation, but it was something we heard strongly during the prorogation, is that the businesses wanted the tenants that were small businesses in commercial properties wanted the support to go directly to the small business owner so that they could pay their rent with the resources, instead of it going through a more complex scheme, which would go through their landlord, which clearly wasn't working. Although it was a good intention on the part of our government, it didn't work as planned or as well as we'd hoped, and it was redesigned promptly, and I think it really was appreciated. There were more higher operating costs for many those small businesses as well, and definitely weak demand. So they're anticipating a weakness in the demand for their services. Now, this wasn't the case with every industry. Certainly, there are some examples in my community that I know of that there's some larger businesses that did quite well in the pandemic. But for the most part, the highest impacted sectors and industries and the small businesses that operate within those really, were affected by a weak demand for their services and products, and also if they were to operate, they had higher operating costs. They had social distancing. They couldn't service as many individuals or take the volume of sales. There were all kinds of things that they had to do to manage, infection or prevent infection and control and operate with health and safety at the forefront. and develop protocols. There's all kinds of extra work that they had to do and some extra costs for many of them. Also, trade flows between the US and Canada were impacted greatly by case numbers. So as the case numbers went up and down in the United States and in Canada, they impacted the trade flows between the US and Canada, despite the fact that, of course, our government, I think, has done a lot of work to try and keep the trade flows between Canada and the US going during the pandemic and not have major interruptions. There's some evidence in the report to show that the trade flows with the US were impacted by the case numbers of people suffering from COVID-19. I also want to speak to a little bit about the structural challenges in heavily impacted sectors. Transportation and warehousing sector employs 1 million people across Canada. 50% of employment is in accommodation and food services. Tourism, 22.1 million tourists from abroad would have come into Canada. Travelers spent over $22 billion in Canada previously and spent approximately $1,640 per trip. That's in 2018. Just think about how many less people came into Canada. I think we heard from the Minister of Public Safety back then that travel was down about 98%, if I remember correctly. So you just think about the 22.1 million tourists that would normally come into Canada and all of the economic activity and revenue that would be generated for businesses that serve those travelers, which was estimated at $22 billion a year. So just imagine when tourism is down that low, just how much our economy is impacted by that. The airline industry, 2001 after 9/11 declined by 26%. In 2003, after the SARS outbreak, the decline in the industry was 26%. These were unprecedented numbers for impacts on the airline industry. So 26% after 9/11, right? 26% decrease in the industry after the SARS outbreak. In 2020, after the global pandemic, decline in the industry was 97%. 97. Again, have I made my point clear yet? That this is an unprecedented, I hate that word at this point because people use it so often. I'm like sick of hearing it. I'm sick of saying it, but it literally is unprecedented. The evidence is clear. After 9/11, 26% decline in the industry of the airline industry. 26% after the SARS outbreak, 97% during COVID-19. So, I mean, the list goes on and on. I have so much more data and information. I feel like I could speak forever. I don't know whether my other colleagues want a chance here to speak, but I have a lot more to say, Madam Chair, but I also don't want to dominate the airwaves and not give my other colleagues time to speak. So I have, I want to follow through with my argument, but perhaps I'll take a little break and let one of my other colleagues say a few words, and I'll get back on the speakers list to continue my argument because I'm by no means finished and have quite a bit more to say on this matter, and would be grateful for some more time to express my thoughts. But I'll turn it over to the next on the speakers list. I'm not sure, but I think it might be my friend and colleague, Daryl Sampson, if I'm not mistaken. But thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull, and I hope you're feeling okay. I wanted to survey the committee. Ms. Patty Pat-Taylor, maybe whatever you have to say is, I don't know, will inform me as to what I probably have on my mind.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I did not mean to interrupt your thought. I'm just wondering, yes, if we could perhaps survey the committee members to see what is the plan for the day. Are we prepared to suspend or are we going to be continuing?
My question was just this, is similar, just so the staff, the clerk, and everybody can prepare in the room, because they're asking me for direction as to whether the cleaning staff can come in for the next committee. They need about an hour's time, but I don't have any direction as to whether this committee would like to continue past the 2:30 time. 2:30 is generally the time that is needed to switch over if the next committee is going to have their slot. So any ideas? Has anybody spoken to any of the party whips? And you can maybe give me information as to that.
So Ruby, I just put up my hand on this. I think we're good to go. We're good to go till 2:30. We know that the Human Resources Skills Development Committee has a very, very important piece of legislation that's coming forward. So we want to honor the fact that that needs to be heard today. But I would ask that we would, if we do suspend, that we return on Thursday, but also to ensure that the room, that we do have coverage, because we're continuing to try to make sure all other committees are able to sit as well. But it would be great if we could get this one over and done with. This filibuster from Brian was saying it's been going on for a few weeks. It's been exactly 2 months and a few days now. So, I know we want to all get it over with. And so perhaps we can focus on making sure it's done on Thursday and blocking out Thursday. Let's get this done.
Okay, I like the ambition and maybe the motivation that's being provided by Ms. Vecchio. Seeing that it's 2:27, there's no really, sorry, Mr. Sampson, I feel that, giving you a couple of minutes would probably be unfair, knowing how passionate you get when you speak as well. So you would be on the speakers list. We would only be suspending and carrying the speakers list forward. Perhaps we may have some resolution and votes on these motions or a new path forward. I don't know. But I do encourage everyone, in committee, but also, in your personal time too, to maybe try to see if there's a path forward that we can find. So having said that, I will suspend until Thursday's scheduled time. Thank you.
I'm going to miss the fun, Madam Chair. I was here.